The Michael Morton Act took effect January 1st, 2014, requiring every prosecutor in the state of Texas to give over evidence to criminal defense attorneys. In Harris County, are prosecutors really turning over all their evidence to Harris County lawyers? And if they are or are not, how would we ever know? And how do we hold prosecutors accountable to their obligations under Michael Morton? Good evening and welcome to HCCLA's Reasonable Doubt. My name's Carmen Rowe, and I'm the president of HCCLA, the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. We're the largest local criminal defense bar in the country. And tonight we have special guest John Raley, who represented Michael Morton pro bono and ultimately saved his life. We're going to discuss prosecutorial accountability tonight with him and much more with our hosts, Jimmy Ardoin and Damon Parrish.
Thank you, Carmen. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Reasonable Doubt, sponsored by HCCLA. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you will tweet us your questions at HCCLA_TV and call in later in the 8:30 hour for our show. We'll be taking questions all night. As Carmen said, we have John Raley tonight, and we're going to talk about Michael Morton. We're going to talk about criminal discovery. We're going to talk about a lot of issues, and in fact, get into what John is doing these days after Michael Morton. But right now, I want to bring in my co-host, Damon Parrish. Damon, good morning, or good evening. How are you?
All right, yourself, and good evening to you.
I'm good. I want to get to our current events for this week, and I want to start off with kind of what we left off with last week in terms of the Fourth Amendment and government intrusion into our life, and talk a little bit about Edward Snowden, because
all right. This
week, he announced that he wants to come back to the U.S., but he doesn't think he can get a fair trial here. I look at it as kind of, he doesn't think he can win his case, because, I mean, that's a debate. But so, the question is, I guess I'm wondering is, why do you think he can't get a fair trial?
Well, so it's funny, to answer that question, I have always said, Jimmy, if you want a fair trial, have your case in the news, because the fairest criminal cases where we see a fair presentation of evidence, defense attorneys actually getting the discovery, thank you, John Raley, that we're supposed to get, that information happens on a very, when the media is attached to a case. So I think Snowden will get a good fair trial. Now, that being said, I mean, he's accused of leaking classified documents that have endangered the entirety of the country, that put the entire of the NSA Project Prism under review, which probably led to our last week's episode and more stuff. So it's can he get a fair trial? He will get the fairest trial he could possibly get. Now, will he get found not guilty? That remains to be seen.
And the charges that he's got facing, he's charged at a federal court in Virginia, in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is a popular venue for charging these kinds of cases. The Obama administration has prosecuted at least 7 people under this act so far. All of them have been convicted or pled. Yeah. So, I mean, he's entitled to a jury trial. I kind of feel like it's just perhaps he wants something that he can't have, and that is some sort of sweetheart deal or a dismissal and apology letter.
Well, 2 things. You know, he's probably homesick and wants to come home. I don't blame him. And secondly, I think by putting it out on the news, hey, I don't think I'm going to get a fair trial, so I can't come home. But if you guarantee me a fair trial, I'll come home. It kind of is like a media spin on this case. And so it helps him project and force the hand of everybody to make sure that he gets the deal he wants, or at least the deal he thinks is fair.
Well, I want to ask you about this. There was a U.S. News and World Report article that came out yesterday. We have one Senator, Dianne Feinstein, from California, and then we have a congressman from Florida, Alan Grayson, who are kind of locked in this debate about former head of the CIA, David Petraeus, and him getting a sweetheart deal. He pled guilty to a misdemeanor for sharing CIA confidential secrets with his then mistress at the time. He gets a sweetheart deal, and the congressman from Florida is calling for Edward Snowden to get a similar deal. Do you think that's right?
No, absolutely not.
Why?
No. All right, here's the deal. General Petraeus served our country for 37 years, and he rose the ranks from lieutenant military to general and commander of the of our forces in Afghanistan, and he was head of the CIA. So we have, and you know, when you do a criminal case, it's not just the crime we litigate, it's also the person, their story, where they've been, their character. You have General Petraeus, who's a 37-year veteran, a 37-year person who's dedicated his life to the country, and that, to me, plays a factor. That, plus the fact that General Petraeus did not leak the information to everybody. He gave it to his mistress, which was incredibly dumb. His mistress, who is a journalist, so eventually it was going to come out. Incredibly dumb, absolutely. He's not the first person to do that. Unfortunately, he will not be the last. But he didn't take his information and just give it out to the world and potentially damage United States security like Snowden did.
Well, what about the argument, because I think this is an interesting argument to be made, that Snowden is actually a whistleblower, and that the Espionage Act, when it was enacted back in the early part of the 20th century, really didn't take into account whistleblowers like we do today, and therefore it's a much more punitive measure and doesn't protect people like Snowden, who is, and the way the congressman described it was, look, he was trying to educate us, and as you said, Damon, I mean, right. part of why we had our show last week was probably because of what Snowden did. So, but you say he doesn't deserve the same protection. So I'm wondering why, if he's leading to the stuff we talked about last week, which helped us, why does he not deserve some sort of protection as a whistleblower? Well,
and I say that to say that when a whistleblower by its very nature is telling a secret, right? You're blowing the whistle on some sort of secret that's going on. So that in and of itself is something. Snowden was put in a position to where he had access to information and things that hurt the entirety of the country, our secrecy and what we were doing. Now, am I glad he put it out there? Absolutely. Because I do not believe in government spying on its own citizen. You know, I don't believe in that at all. So I'm glad he did. But like everything you do, your actions have consequences. And does he deserve a sweetheart deal? No. Did Petraeus deserve a sweetheart deal? No. But are they the same? Can we truly compare Snowden's action in releasing Project Prism and all that it entailed compared to what General Petraeus did, which didn't really release anything. His mistress got it, and then it became known that she got it after investigating their affair, but he didn't really release it to the public in the same fashion as Snowden did.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting case. I really want to keep our eye on this one. Next item I want to get to with you real quick so we can get to our guest this evening is the DOJ's decision not to prosecute Officer Darren Wilson. They came out this week, they finished their criminal investigation, and they said that Wilson's actions do not constitute prosecutable violations. Sorry, I couldn't get that. And they went on to make several other findings, including that they found evidence of racial bias and everything else. What's your reading of the findings by the DOJ?
I wasn't surprised by it. I did not anticipate the DOJ to actually come out and say, in Wilson's case, that that's prosecutorial or that there's enough there to sustain a prosecution. And you, as practicing in federal law, federal court, you know as well as I do, they only really prosecute cases they think they can win. You know, when you get a federal client charged with a federal crime, it's usually not like in state court where it's half BS, half whatever. It's usually mountains of evidence, wiretaps, surveillance, confidential informants, cooperating defendants. A lot of people talking a lot of things against your client. And so there's a lot of evidence there. There wasn't a lot of evidence from what I saw with Wilson. But it was good to see that they did say, hey, Wilson may or may not, you know, and what they said was not that he was innocent or that he didn't do what people say he did, just that they can't prove it. And that's what I think the government should do with prosecutions. It was also good to see that they said, hey, by the way, Ferguson PD, y'all are tainted. Y'all are bad. You know, you have this history and pattern of racial injustice, of racial abuse that needs to be corrected, and not just racial abuse, but also sexual, because they allow female officers, you know, people within their own rank and behind the blue wall, to face similar types of assault, of a racial assault, but of a sexual nature. So it's good to see that, and hopefully Ferguson will be receptive to this and make changes.
Well, I'm sure we haven't heard the end of this. That's for sure, and we'll keep an eye on it as well. Michael Morton spent 25 years of his life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He was accused and found guilty of brutally murdering his wife. Evidence later proved that the DNA in that case was flawed and that somebody else actually committed the crime. Thanks to John Raley and his efforts, Michael Morton was freed in 2011. John, thank you for joining us tonight.
You bet.
Really appreciate you. You're a civil lawyer.
Yes, sir.
What the hell are you doing on a criminal case?
Why,
a wonderful question.
Why are you perching on our territory?
You can have it. I remember one time when we were really up against it in Williamson County, and I had felt that I'd just banging my head against a wall for years.
And that's not an unusual occurrence for lawyers going to Williamson.
Yeah, I was kind of naive going in, not so much now. And I told my friend at the Innocence Project in New York, Nina Morrison, what the heck? And she said, "Welcome to my world." And I said, "Your world is a dark and scary place, and I'm glad I don't live there."
Now, you practice mostly civil law here in Houston.
Yes.
At a firm, you and your partner, Raley and Bowick, LLP.
Yes.
Tell us about what you mostly do for your day job.
We do commercial litigation.
Okay. So helping defend businesses, and I'm sure from the plaintiff's side as well.
Plaintiffs and defense side,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
So this is way outside your ballpark.
It is, but this is an interesting thing. Like many good things in life, this has been a team effort. And while I was out jousting with John Bradley and Ken Anderson, my law partner, Bobby Bowick, was at home keeping the firm afloat and working doubly hard to do so. So I wanted to give a nice shout out to him and the other people of our law firm that had to work so hard, because pro bono, when you have a little firm, leaves a pretty big hole.
Well, in cases like this, they require a team.
Yeah.
Because there is so much time and volunteer that goes into doing a case like this.
And I had the New York Innocence Project with me as my co-counsel, so it's pretty good backup.
And you had a little bit of background because I believe your dad and your brother were both prosecutors, is that correct?
My father is a retired U.S. attorney. My brother is currently an assistant U.S. attorney. That's why this case was so hard for me at first. It was really an eye-opener, right? Because I grew up watching it done honorably and ethically, and I really believe that prosecutors are the good guys. And I still believe that most of them really care and try to keep our streets safe and try to protect us. But every once in a while, you get a bad apple, and we were really struggling for a long time in Williamson County.
So I'm curious, how did a civil lawyer that does commercial litigation find his way to a criminal appeal on somebody after 25 years, or at this point it wasn't 25 years, it was like 18 years in prison? How did you get brought into this world?
You know, the good book says God's ways are not our ways. Right. And I had just finished trying a medical malpractice case, a brain damage case. It took several weeks to try. And I was at Fulbright and Jaworski at the time. An associate there watched me try that case. She was friends with the Innocence Project people. When she went back to New York, they said, "We've got this new case with scientific evidence, timing of death by stomach contents. Do you know a lawyer that's used to evidence involving science in a courtroom?" And she said, "Yeah, call Raley." And they called me, and I said, "I'm honored to get the call, but are you sure you're calling the right guy? Because I've never had a criminal case before." And they said, "Don't worry, we'll be at your side. If you need any questions answered about criminal law, you call anytime, and we'll be with you on it." They needed boots on the ground. They needed somebody to make the arguments and be there. But
how did they convince you? Because if you ask me, Damon Parrish, to pick up a commercial civil litigation, and I'm guessing of your caliber, no, I'm not doing that. Wouldn't even know where to begin and how to get started. So how did they convince you to completely switch to mindset from commercial to criminal to appeals? Just where the only thing tangible was that you have a scientific mind. I mean, how did they get you?
Well, I mean, I read the file and I realized any lawyer can look at evidence, right, that there really was no solid evidence against this man. And then I went to visit him in prison. And there was nothing about this man that didn't speak from a place of complete integrity and honor and sincerity. And I came home to my wife, Kelly, who I asked for advice on many things. And I said, "Kelly, my God, he's innocent. We have to get him out."
There you go.
And she looked right at me and she said, "Then do it." And she knew more than I did then what I was going into, because she had researched Williamson County, and she knew that for generations the assistant DA became the DA who became the judge, and it was just in a rotation, so that the judge who tried Michael Morton's case had been the DA. The DA who prosecuted Michael Morton later became judge. This is Ken Anderson. Before he did, he hired John Bradley, raised him up to take his place.
Right.
So, as DA, so I am trying to persuade John Bradley to let me do a DNA test that might prove that his mentor prosecuted an innocent man.
And I want to talk about that again and really focus on that, because first thing you did when you got on the case in 2005 was to ask for that retest.
Yes.
And it was to retest a blue bandana that was really the seminal part of the state's case.
Correct.
And John Bradley, as you said, who took over as DA, he fought you tooth and nail on getting that retested.
A little bit of background for people that don't know the case. Michael's wife, Christine, his college sweetheart, mother of his child, was brutally murdered when he was at work that morning. He kissed her goodbye and went to work. The sliding glass door in back was unlocked. A lot of people with privacy fences don't lock the sliding glass door. There was a footprint there that no plaster cast was made of when Mark Allen Norwood jumped the fence. There were fingerprints on the door that nobody ran. He went into the house to burglarize it and bludgeoned Christine to death in her bed, horribly, brutally, with a blunt instrument. Picked up some items and ran, and we always contended that the bandana which was found behind the house was along the escape route of Mark Allen Norwood, that he may have wiped Christine's blood from his face and hands, stuck it in his pocket, and ran, and then it may contain her blood intermingled with the sweat and skin cell DNA of the murderer. And then if you ran that DNA hit, that profile, through the National Data Bank, which has tens of millions of profiles, you could get a hit on a known offender. And after 7 years of fighting, we finally got that done. And that's exactly what happened. And Mark Allen Norwood had a 30-year record of felonies, breaking and entering residences, and now we found out that he actually killed another young woman 2 years after Christine Morton.
In a similar fashion, correct?
Exactly the same way. Bludgeoned to death in her bed, furniture, whoa, put on top.
It's all right.
It's all right.
Waterproof.
You know, I'm animated and passionate about my cases.
That's what you should.
And I may have a little baptism here, but go ahead, keep going.
No, I mean, I wanted to point out, and what I find most offensive about it is it took 5 years for you to get that order signed.
Yes.
He fought you for 5 years on retesting DNA that might prove someone innocent.
Right.
How much money was wasted by John Bradley?
Well, this is the question that is often asked. Don't worry about it. We're fine. Why would you spend taxpayer money and time fighting a test that can only reveal the truth, that would be free to the state? The Innocence Project would pay for the cost of the test. It makes no sense.
Not at all.
Unless you consider this dynamic that I didn't fully understand about Williamson County in the kind of incestuous way that prosecutors became assistants, became DAs, became judges, and it had always been that way for years. And so Michael really, following my father's advice, who, as I said, was a retired prosecutor, Dad said, look, not only would I agree to the motion, it would be a joint motion. We would walk it through. And I tried to reason with John Bradley. I said, Mr. Bradley, we're only searching for the truth here. If you really believe that Michael Morton is guilty, all the more reason you should agree to the test, because no bad things can happen, only good things. Either Michael Morton is where he's supposed to be, or a murderer is at large. Don't you want to find out? Why not do the test? And he said it would muddy the waters. And I didn't understand what he meant by that, but my response was, truth clarifies.
Well, so speaking on the DNA test, at some point in time, he did agree to a DNA test, right? It was
no, sir.
Of the sheets, right? Or
he didn't agree to anything. He fought hardest on the bandana. That was a signal to the judge to deny the bandana.
Right.
So the judge allowed us to test other things besides the bandana, denied the bandana.
Right.
He didn't concede. The one thing he did was he said, well, you know, Raley, if you will agree that only the hair in Christine's hand can be tested, and we will withdraw efforts to test anything else. I will agree to that. And I said, no, the hair is probably Michael's or Christine's. They both slept in that bed. I mean, there's a tiny chance it's somebody else's, but why would I agree? Who do you think I am? How foolish do you think I am, sir?
And this murder took place like the day after Michael's birthday, correct?
Yes, it did.
Which
August 13th, 1986.
It kind of compounds the tragedy of the situation that he lost his wife the day after his birthday.
He lost his wife, and then a few weeks later,
lost his freedom son.
He was literally holding his son in his arms when they came to his door to arrest him. And they took Eric out of his arms and handed him to a police officer and cuffed Michael and led him away. And this little boy who had just lost his mother and didn't understand,
Right.
reaching out to his father and screaming, "Daddy, Daddy." And that's the last time Michael was alone with Eric for 22 years. That's the level of seriousness. And by prosecuting an innocent man and concealing evidence of his innocence, which we'll talk about in a minute,
Get to that too.
they let this monster, as Eric described him at the time, and we'll talk about that, go, and he killed Deborah Jan Baker 2 years later exactly the same way. And so it affected many families and many relationships. And he had a life of crime for the next 25 years that all could have been avoided.
I want to ask you about the other exculpatory evidence, because what came out was there was a transcript
Yes.
of an interview with Christine Morton's mother,
Yes.
where she described to the investigator at that time that Michael's son described the man as having a big mustache and some sort of monster, but not his dad. And that was not produced.
There were two items of concealed evidence that were in the DA's file. And when we did a Freedom of Information Act request, we got the file. And it's about this thick. And it took us about 15 minutes to find both of these things and hold them in our hands. All right? Now, you know what Brady material is. It's anything that might be useful to a defense. And constitutionally, under Brady versus Maryland, 1963 Supreme Court case, the prosecution is required by constitutional law to turn it over. And Judge Anderson was looked in the eye by the judge, Judge Lott, because there's a motion to compel this stuff and there's all this stuff going on. And he said, "Mr. Anderson, do you have any information that might be useful to the defense?" And he said, "No, sir." Now, here's what he had in his file. First, sightings of an old van in the neighborhood a few days before the murder, and a strange man would get out and walk around behind the Morton house where they found the bandana. He was casing the house for a burglary because Norwood was a burglar. One of the neighbors said, "I think I may know who this guy is." There's no evidence of follow-up. The reason she knew? Because he was a carpet cleaner. He went door to door asking if you need your carpets cleaned. That's how he picked his prey. They didn't follow that lead. They could have found Norwood. The thing you referenced, Jimmy, was that there was a transcript, verbatim. Eric talked one time about this matter to his grandmother, Eric's mother, the day of her funeral. He said, "Mommy's sleeping with the flowers." He said, "The monster came into the house. Stop it." And he was reliving it in his mind. He said, "He's mad. Big man with big mustache." If you've seen the mugshot of Norwood, you know what we're talking about. He said, his hands are red. He's hitting Mommy. Mommy's crying. "Stop it." Now she stopped. He put a blue suitcase on Mommy. That's the way they found her in the bed. He saw it happen. And the grandmother asked him, "Eric, was Daddy home?" "No," he said. "Eric and Mommy was home." District Attorney Anderson knew this was in his file, and he did not produce it.
It's just,
And so they just framed Michael.
it baffles me because, and I've asked this question before on this show to another guest we had, and you're actually the best person to ask this to because you're a civil lawyer. It constantly amazes me that you have more rights to discovery as a civil litigant, not just in Texas, but all over this country, than you do as a criminal defendant.
This is something that makes no sense at all to me. I don't know if you guys can explain it, but I've asked this question of Barry Scheck, Jerry Goldstein, others. I said, guys, look, if it only involves somebody's money, I can see all of the evidence of the other side.
You can get their bank accounts, you can get everything.
I can get everything. But if it involves a man or woman's life or liberty,
Can't get anything.
I can't.
Nope.
Can you explain that to me? And they go, we cannot explain that to you. And you really can't. But that's just an absurdity of the system. The Michael Morton Act hopefully is doing strides, and we can get to that. But yeah, that's a stark contrast. Michael was convicted on junk science. The pathologist who had never timed death before or since, and didn't do it this time because in his initial report because he said he didn't know how. Timed death based on stomach contents alone, which all the literature says you can't do.
Right.
He hadn't seen the body for 2 days. And so he gave a time of death estimate, but the thing is, his initial estimate was after Michael left, which would exonerate Michael. So the district attorney got him to ratchet it up earlier in time to before Michael left, and then announced that he had the evidence that Michael did it. The pathologist admitted that it's not a scientific opinion. Somehow it came into evidence.
As a scientific opinion.
As a scientific opinion. But he admitted it wasn't scientific, it's just my opinion. And the prosecutor argued 6 times on rebuttal, Ken Anderson, medical science proves Michael Morton is guilty, time of death. And that's all they had. And it was fraud. This case represents, as Judge Harrell said, the very worst of science in court and the very best of science in court, which was the DNA exoneration.
I want to talk about the 2 prosecutors on that note too. First, let's go back to John Bradley.
Yeah.
He has said that his position with regard to the retesting was, apparently he sought Ken Anderson's counsel with regard to what he should do. I mean, that in and of itself, maybe I misread that statement, but that seems wholly inappropriate to me, that here you have an investigation of possible retesting, and the new DA goes and consults the old DA about what he should do with regard to agreeing or not.
Why not just seek the truth?
Right.
There was a time after Michael got out when we were trying to depose Ken Anderson for the court of inquiry. And Anderson lawyered up, and he had a lot of opposition to it. And there was an argument about it in court. And the judge asked me what I thought. And I said, Your Honor, I don't know very much about the law on this point, but before you are 2 sides. One side wants to reveal the truth, bring it to light. The other side wants to conceal it in darkness. And they've been doing so successfully for many years. You just have to decide who you're going to vote for. And he goes, well, I'm going to vote for the guys seeking the truth. And I said, thank you, Your Honor. So we got to take the deposition.
Yeah. And
John, when this case is just astounding at how you can reconstruct, and I'm not certain in hindsight, but reconstruct what happened, and it just makes total sense. And it makes it curious. Did they ever explain to you why didn't the police do the same thing? I mean, the way you were able to reconstruct the guy case in the joint, the bandana, the suitcase, the statement from the son, all these things seem to make sense.
They could have had
him. And they didn't.
They could have had Norwood within a few weeks. You know, because of my father's contacts, I was able to talk to a retired FBI agent in Oklahoma, whose name escapes me right now, but he said, okay, let's look at the crime scene. What did they do? Fingerprints. He goes, okay, they've run the fingerprints. And I said, no, sir, they never ran the fingerprints that I can see. And he goes, they never ran the prints? Who are these people?
Right.
You know, are they interested in catching the murderer?
So did you get, that's my point, did you think Michael Morton was targeted for some reason? Like all this ignorance of normal police investigation, and he was convicted. Why Michael Morton?
I have struggled with this for years. For one thing, they want to have the image that Williamson County is Mayberry RFD, that everybody's, it's like it's still in the 50s, and everybody's safe, and we don't. The sheriff actually said a few weeks afterwards, nobody needs to worry about a serial murderer. Well, that's exactly what they needed to worry about.
Exactly.
But are they evil and intentionally prosecuted somebody they knew was innocent, or are they just so biased that they made a decision, a snap decision, and then they had this confirmation bias where they don't really consider very seriously the evidence that was coming in that he was innocent. Mm-hmm. But there's a desire to win. There's a desire to get check the box and say, we got the murderer. It's the husband. Everybody's safe. you know, and Michael got caught up in all that.
Well, and John Bradley has said, he has made the claim that he now, after this case, that his outlook on inmates' claims of innocence has changed. Do you really believe that?
Deeds, not words.
Right.
Deeds matter. I see no evidence that he is truly a changed guy. He testified in the court of inquiry. He, you know, when he was trying, I gave up long ago worrying about whether he was going to sue me. After he had no place else to turn, after we had linked Mark Allen Norwood to the murder of Deborah Jan Baker, identical MO 2 years later, and proved that Norwood lived a block from where Baker lived at the time she was murdered. There was no place else he could turn, and he flipped and, you know, kind of cooperated a little bit. He was running for re-election, and he knew that the media was on him. After he lost the re-election, primary re-election, which is reassuring to me, he flipped again in hope of some sort of a government appointment, and he sided with Anderson again in the court of inquiry. And so I really don't see any evidence that he's changed. I hope that he has. I hope he's found the Lord. Road to Damascus experience, but I haven't seen it. That's between him and his soul, and I can't look into that window.
I want to talk about the court of inquiry that you've been mentioning, but before I do that, I want to remind everybody it's 8:30 right now. Please call in the numbers right at the bottom of your screen. Also, you can tweet us your questions at HCCLA_TV. Call in, send us your tweets. For John Raley, we're going to take them live here on the air. John, the court of inquiry that you've been referring to.
Yes.
That was the investigation into Ken Anderson.
Yes.
There was a formal investigation into his actions. At the end of it all, just to kind of sum up, I'll let you walk us through the details of everything because you lived it firsthand, but he only ended up doing like 5 days in jail on this thing.
That's one way to look at it.
And lost his law license.
That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is we're not aware of any other time in American history when a prosecutor served time in jail for concealing evidence.
That's true.
And so the fact that it happened at all should give some pause to prosecutors, don't you think? And the fact that he lost his license to practice law. And the only reason he has a pension now, would you like to know?
I'd love to know.
Michael Morton said his wife and children didn't hurt me. So it was Michael. I mean, he is one of the finest men I've ever known or ever will know. And that's just an example. But here's another. So how did we get the court of inquiry? Our efforts to help Michael were on a couple of tracks. One is exoneration by DNA testing. The other is a violation of due process by concealment of this case dispositive evidence of his innocence. We got the DNA hit. We proved he was actually innocent. So there really was no need for the other. But Michael said, I want to find out how this happened to me and why so that I can stop it from happening to other innocent people. And if I need to stay in prison another 5 months, that's okay with me.
Which I do want to talk to you about that one in a second.
And so, fortunately, he didn't have to. We were able to take these depositions and figure out the evidence of the concealment and all of that. Go ahead.
Michael Morton was offered at numerous times to accept culpability and we'll give you parole. Do this and we'll let you out of prison. If you would just be quiet and leave us alone, we'll let you go free. I know he was not tempted, but when you were working this case through, how did you deal with that? How could you tell Michael, hey, listen, I know you've been in prison for the last 18 years, and I'm sorry, I believe you're innocent, but they're offering you the chance to get out right now and rebuild your life, but you got to say you did something you didn't do or whatever.
I remember this phone call like it was yesterday. He'd been in about 23 years, a couple years before we got him out. And he said, I'm being offered a parole. And I said, that's great. I mean, because I just wanted him out. He's innocent. And he goes, there's one condition. I have to show remorse for my crime. Mm-hmm. And my breathing stopped for a second because I thought, I don't think I can advise him because I really don't know what I would do in the crucible, you know?
Exactly.
I might say, I'd like to think I'd be noble, but after 23 years with my parents getting elderly, I might say, I'm really sorry, let me go. I mean, we just don't know until we're there.
Right.
It's only speculation. So I said, what are you going to do? And he said, this is verbatim, All I have left is my actual innocence. And if I have to be in prison the rest of my life, I'm not giving that up. And this rush of emotion came over me, and I promised him, I said, Michael, I will never quit, ever. As long as I'm breathing air, I am trying to get you out of prison. And then we hung up the phone, and the Innocence Project person goes, what are you doing? I mean, what if there's no DNA hit? And I said, he's innocent. There will be a way. There will always be an option. We may not know what it is right now. But in my faith, I believe God cares when innocent people are in prison.
And at this point, you're already 4 or 5 years into work. Like you were knee deep into it when they offered him a chance for parole. Or
we are not backing down,
right?
Ever.
Well, and those are not conversations you have with your corporate clients, let's be honest. That's one of those things that as a lawyer, you become seriously invested in your client's case, in his desires, in his motivations, and his purpose, so to speak.
Well, obviously, the corporate cases are important to the clients, but when it involves a man's life or liberty, it ups the ante, doesn't it? You guys are my heroes. You're the ones that make the Constitution work. You're in this, doing this every day. I had this case. It got kind of crazy. But anyway, yes, it's a lot different.
We've got a phone call I want to get to.
Oh, we'll take it.
Hello, thank you for calling HCCLA Reasonable Doubt.
Hello. This kind of stuff makes me sick. What kind of checks are in place for prosecutors who do this kind of conduct? How often does this occur? And when prosecutors are caught, and when the government's caught doing this kind of stuff, ideally, what should happen to them?
That's a multi-part question. Thanks for calling in with your question. I guess let's kind of break that down because in terms of the number, I mean, obviously we've seen a good number of cases here in Texas here the last few years that have come out. We saw the Ted Stevens case on the federal level a few years ago come out. So I think it happens, first of all, in answering the caller's question of how often it happens, I think it happens a lot more often, A, than we know about, and B, obviously we've seen a lot more incidents here in the past 5 to 6 years, I would say. You
guys do this every day. This is your day job, so you're better to comment than me. I certainly experienced it in Michael's case. I want to believe, though, that Michael's story and what happened to Ken Anderson, who was one of the most respected members of his community, a full district judge. He'd been prosecutor of the year of Texas, a leader in civic activities. It's almost what Scripture would call a whitewashed tomb. And I'm not pointing the finger at him because we all have our own personal sins. Sure. But he had this dual life, and he is disrobed and disbarred and serves time in jail.
And that, as you pointed out, that's the first time, to answer the point of the caller's question.
As far as I know,
yeah,
I'm not aware of it happening before.
I can't think of any. But
never heard of that.
In terms of the
state bar has changed their approach to it. The statute of limitations has changed.
Right.
Well, I think they're much more serious about it.
And also on the last point of the caller is, and kind of brings us to the Michael Morton Act.
Right.
What can be done to change this? And the first step was the change in the discovery rules.
Right.
Texas Code of Criminal Procedure 39.14. You and Michael especially, were very instrumental in getting that change made with the legislature. Talk about that process for us. Walk us through what you did and all the time, toil, and effort that you and Michael put into that.
When Michael got out, he told me that he was dedicating the rest of his life to try to make sure this didn't happen to other innocent people. Mm-hmm. And the Michael Morton Act was part of that. He didn't originally know they were going to name it for him. And Senator Rodney Ellis, who has done as much as any legislator in Texas to improve our system, God bless Rodney Ellis, was the author of the bill. What it does is it codifies the Constitution. They're supposed to be doing this anyway, but now statutorily they must.
Right.
And they can no longer be the gatekeeper of what the defense sees. There can no longer be trial by ambush under the Michael Morton Act. What happened to Michael should not, if the law is followed, happen again.
So what specifically, do you know, what specifically from the Michael Morton Act do we have now that, let's say, we either didn't have or didn't have access to pre-Michael Morton?
It depends on the counties. Some counties already had what they call an open file policy, where the defense could see the prosecutor's file. Some didn't. Now they all must. All across the state, the defense could see it. I was thinking of something interesting from the Court of Inquiry. It's a different mindset. Rusty Hardin was cross-examining Judge Anderson, former Judge Anderson, Ken Anderson, and Anderson said, "I'd be a terrible prosecutor now. I'd turn everything over." And there was silence in the courtroom, and Rusty Hardin said, "Why wouldn't that make you a great prosecutor?"
Unbelievable.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful, and I truly believe that our justice system is getting better, that we're on a path to improvement, and that it truly is the best justice system in the world. There are flaws, but we're improving.
We have another call that I want to get
Yeah,
to.
go.
Hello, thank you for calling HCCLA Reasonable Doubt.
Did the Michael Morton Act affect prosecutors' immunities?
Oh, no, it did not. They can't be sued is the question you're asking. No. Unfortunately, I can be sued, you can be sued, prosecutors cannot be sued.
Yeah.
So the only sanction against them is either criminal or, through a grievance through the bar.
Do you think the next time this happens that that this can happen again? I'll hang up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
And that's what I guess I want to play off that a little bit, because does the law really go far enough? I mean, it doesn't really prevent this kind of stuff from happening again. It doesn't really give out any punitive measure. I mean, and to go back to what I asked you before about the difference in civil and criminal, I mean, the rules of civil procedure with regard to discovery are voluminous, and they outline penalties and sanctions and for non-compliance. 3914 doesn't really, the new 3914 really doesn't even address those issues.
It's an important step, and it was unanimous. And Michael Morton willed it into being. He met with the senators and congressmen that opposed it and looked them in the eye and said, "Please explain to me, Senator, why you're opposed to the bill," and waited for an answer. And it's kind of hard to look in the eyes of somebody that's been in prison 25 years. Anthony Graves told Michael, if you've got something to say it now,
Right.
while you have their attention.
Because it was Michael Morton, it was Anthony Graves, it was Tim Cole, it was not a lot of other people, unfortunately, but more people there, and
Right.
they created a powerful story of
Right.
justice
Yeah,
to help this bill out.
yeah, men of character, all of them.
So when you were in the trenches and you're down there in Williamson County, did you encounter more Michael Mortons there, or people you thought might be like Michael Morton, or do you think he was just a complete one-off, both in investigation and prosecution and everything?
I am convinced that there are many more Michael Mortons in prison. If only 3% of the people in prison are wrongfully incarcerated, that's something like 30,000. And I have gotten heart-rending letters from Williamson County and other places around Texas and across the country of people that feel like they have the exact same experience, or their family member or their loved one. And I have a sense of what the Innocence Project must have to go through with thousands of these letters, and they try to triage it and they try to get help. And that's why, if any lawyer is out there watching, I hope that they will step up and join in the pro bono efforts, because the need is so great. There's so much to be done.
John, I want to ask you a little bit about Michael Morton himself and what he's been doing aside from the discovery stuff. But what's life like for him? I mean, he had to be reunited with his son and brought back into the fold of that. Tell us a little bit about his life.
My wife Kelly found Eric.
If you can give a background of also what happened between
Yes. So
Michael and his son.
Eric was raised by others, and was told that his father murdered his mother.
Right.
And over time came to believe it himself. And it would make no sense to love your father if he killed your mother.
Especially.
And so from Eric's perspective, and Eric forgot what he saw, or it's buried in his, as a defense mechanism. You can't imagine seeing your mother murdered as a 3-year-old, how horrible that would be. So it's down there deep. And so he thought that his father killed his mother, and there were these newspaper articles about it. And so at age 13, he told his father that he didn't want to do the court-ordered visitation anymore. And then at age 18, he wrote Michael and said that you're no longer my father. I've changed my name. I've been adopted. Severed the parent-child relationship. It wasn't even a letter. It was a notice to Michael that this had happened. And Michael, he was told by an old con, the only people who survive prison, I mean, you may come out breathing and your heart beating, but you're not really alive. The only people who come out human are those that have something to look forward to on the other side. And for Michael, it was Eric, and when that was taken away. But he found a way to find grace and peace. And my wife found Eric, and we reunited them in our house, and it was a real special moment to see them together again. And now they're very happy, and Michael's a proud grandfather. And Michael married a wonderful woman that he met in church named Cynthia. So he's written a book called Getting Life, available on Amazon, and there's a documentary called An Unreal Dream on Amazon and on Netflix. Michael has an interest in both. I have no interest in either, but I'm happy for Michael to make a little bit on it.
Good.
We got another call coming in.
Yep.
I'm going to take that. Hello, welcome to HCCLA Reasonable Doubt. Thanks for calling.
Hi, I was just wondering what happened to John Bradley. Is he still putting people in jail or working as a prosecutor?
Can I answer that one?
Absolutely. I think we've got a couple Twitter comments on that one as well.
John Bradley lost the Republican primary for Williamson County DA the year, the next election after Michael. And a lot of the campaign was focused on the Michael Morton story. And so that's kind of reassuring about our political system. He spent the next couple of years, as far as I could tell, trying to get an appointment for some sort of governmental job. He didn't get one. He tried a few times. Recently, he was appointed an assistant prosecutor of the Republic of Palau, which is an island in the South Pacific, which I understand is as far as you can get from Texas on a globe. That's where he is now.
Funny you should mention that because it's far from Texas, but the head of the public defender's office in Palau is a friend of mine, Allison Jackson, who is kicking us all day. Like she is the most aggressive person. So if he's there, he's not in any way, shape, form enjoying a successful career doing anything. So while he's there, I can guarantee you Allison's putting him through the ringer.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So,
you tell Allison, go from me.
Oh, I will do. And she actually was a member of HCCLA, and she was here. She just took the job last year, so she's been there since he's been there before he got there, actually.
Wow.
And she's now head of the PD's office down there, and she's giving it to him, and the system down there as well. So.
Wow.
So he's not happy.
He's not happy.
He's not happy.
Kind of the equivalent of what the old joke about putting you at the Siberian outpost or whatever.
Or Napoleon at Elba or something. He's on an island kind of looking at us. Ken Anderson, disbarred, disgraced, and just kind of living in shame. Mark Allen Norwood, convicted of the murder of Christine Morton. I went to the first day or two of that trial because I wanted to be with my brother Michael Morton when he testified. He was the state's first witness. And we walked out together to the cameras, and there's all these, and I personally don't like to say anything in the middle of a jury trial, but I'm not about to muzzle Michael. He's been muzzled 25 years, and so he stepped up to the cameras. You know what he said?
What did he say?
Just about everybody you know would say, I have waited 25 years for the murder of my wife to be brought to justice, but the day has finally come. Right?
Right.
You know what he said? He said, no one wants this man to get a fair trial more than me. And then he walked away.
Wow.
this guy's on a high spiritual plane.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to talk. We've talked about Michael. We've talked about Ken Anderson. We've talked about all the other players. I want to talk a little bit about you. What you've been doing since freeing Michael Morton. How's life changed for you since this?
Experiences like this change us intrinsically. I'm a different person than when I took this case in 2004. I hope I'm a better person. I know it's changed my family. It was our dinner table conversation for 7 years. My kids all want to kind of go into public service type areas. My daughter's working for UNICEF now. My son, one of my sons is interested in Engineers Without Borders and doing architecture for people in need. And you know, it's changed us. It's changed our family, and it's changed those around us. I've decided to do one of these at a time. Hannah Overton is the current project with Jerry Goldstein. Cynthia Orr has had Hannah's case for 7 years, and she helped me at the tail end of Michael's, and so she called and said, you know, would you be, so how, you can't say no to that, you know, because if your brother, your sister who's been at war with you calls for their battle, and I was honored to, and Hannah is absolutely innocent. And
for those who don't know, Hannah Overton was accused of the murder of a foster child that was in.
Yes, she and her husband were adopting a little 4.5-year-old boy, and he had been abused by his natural mother, who was druggy, and a series of foster homes, and was a troubled child, but they just thought they would love him and bring him into their family with their children. And he had it was undiagnosed, but it's pretty clear that he had this eating disorder called pica, which makes you eat weird things.
Eat everything.
Everything. Lick the floor, dog food, glue in Sunday school class. And he got into the pantry and ate a bunch of either salt or salty seasoning when she was taking care of the baby, and he OD'd on salt. Mm-hmm. And with no evidence whatsoever that this sweet Sunday school teacher, never accused of a crime, loving mother, child care person, they charged her with capital murder and put her away for life, no possibility of parole. And that's just nuts. And the Court of Criminal Appeals actually threw out the conviction recently, but the District Attorney of Nueces County I really probably can't talk much more about this case, but he's threatening to re-prosecute.
He hasn't decided yet whether he's going to or not.
Yeah,
Well, basically, here you go again. Almost same story, different county.
We'll be ready.
Are you going to try that case? I mean, if it goes to trial, are you going to be part of the
Jerry
trial?
Goldstein, Cynthia Orr, and me.
Excellent. Dream team.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored to be in their company.
How do you think going through Michael's case and Hannah's case has changed your perspective on your normal civil practice?
That's a great question. You know what? I hope I never get so old or experienced and calloused that I stop being sad when people lie in court. I've encountered it in my civil practice, including some cases recently. And it doesn't make me as mad as it does just sad for our profession. But I've had to deal with those situations, and it brings back Michael again in some ways.
Are you and Michael still in contact? I'm sure you are, but do you guys still
almost every
talk?
other day. In fact, the only person outside of my nuclear family that has a key to my house and the passcode for my alarm is Michael Morton, because he always comes over and stays with us when he's seeing his son, and I got tired of leaving the office to let him in, so I just said, here's a key. And I mean, he's family.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
Do you think, John, you're talking about encouraging other lawyers to get involved in pro bono efforts and all that. Is this something that we're, and this is more of a, I don't know, I guess a theoretical question, but is there something that we as a profession can do to not only bring the bar together to help with these things, but to also get law students involved at an earlier stage to help with these kind of things?
I really think every opportunity we can to encourage pro bono work. There are law schools. I know that Thurgood Marshall School of Law has almost a triage for these kind of innocence cases. I don't know if U of H does or not, or South Texas, but yeah, I mean, this would be a great thing for the students to get involved in, looking at these things, analyzing them, figuring out what the evidence is. I mean, if I can do it, surely they could. I had no idea what I was doing when I started. I was just absolutely naive about it.
Well, when I was in law school, I don't remember even seeing opportunities like that existed. I mean, you would hear about some clinics and everything, but there was nothing about, hey, get involved in the Innocence Project and really get your fingernails dirty. I mean, there's been a long talk about getting law students more practical experience. Wouldn't working on cases like this
absolutely
be that?
Absolutely.
What do we need to do? What does the Innocence Project need to do to get people like that involved?
I don't know. And remember, there's the New York-based Innocence Project, which is the original one, the ones I worked with, and then there's the Texas Innocence Project, which is not associated formally in any way, but they all kind of know each other. And Barry Scheck decided not to enforce any sort of trademark on the name, because he just figured if anybody's doing this work, it's great.
Right,
right. More the merrier. So I don't know the answer as to how they get the law schools involved. I would just say contact the dean and see if we can get some. They already do clinics. I did a juvenile offender clinic when I was in law school. Why can't there be something similar for these innocence cases? There are a bunch of them.
You know, John, if you had to, or if you could, design a criminal justice system from investigation, arrest, trial to verdict and punishment, how would you design it? And what would you think would be a fair design, both for the person accused and the victim of a crime?
Well, it has to start with the premise that prosecutors are not advocates like in a civil case. They have a duty to justice. They have a higher duty.
Right.
Their job is to lay the evidence out to the jury and let them decide. And if someone's acquitted, that should not be a bad day for them, because the jury has spoken. I once asked my father, why was your conviction rate so high when you were a prosecutor? And he said, because if there wasn't enough evidence to convict, I didn't prosecute them. I said, even if you thought they were guilty? He said, especially if it's a matter of evidence. So you have to start with that premise, and that needs to be driven into prosecutors. This is not a check-the-box win-loss thing for them.
Okay.
Also, I think their files need to be completely open, as the Michael Morton Act tries to do, because it's intrinsically unfair to a defendant to have to try to compete with a prosecutor in investigating. They have so many resources. They can get out there with their agents and they can interview people. And you know what? If an officer comes to the door, it's kind of hard to tell him, no, I don't want to talk to you, you know? But if a defense lawyer comes to the door, they're going to say, hey, I don't want to talk to you, you know? So the file should be completely open. The investigation should be open. And the Michael Morton Act attempts to do that. That should be rigidly enforced.
We have a few seconds left, and I want to get one question that's coming in. And what is the future of the act? You just talked about it. Is there more amendments to come? What's the future of Michael Morton Act hold?
I don't want to speculate. Some think that there may be a movement to pull it back a little bit. It's kind of interesting that the prosecutors who said we don't need it because we do it already are now saying it's too hard to do.
Yeah, it's too much.
Which is inconsistent. But I will be there, and I know Michael will be there, and many other good people, to do anything we can to stop them from rolling it back.
Well, you have done amazing work, John Raley. We appreciate your hard work, and you make us proud to have a bar card in the state of Texas. And I know you do for a lot of other lawyers too. So
I'm proud to be here with you guys. There are a lot of good people out there fighting for justice.
Well, I thank you for coming on tonight and sharing your story and Michael's story with us. And that's all the time we have for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you sending in your questions on Twitter, and as always, calling in with your questions. We'll be back next week for another episode, 8 to 9 p.m., same place, same time. Thanks. Good night.